Good evening. I like you too. But do you like yourself? All right, great. One person in this audience likes themselves. Not everybody likes themselves. Sometimes you kind of dislike who you are. Some people even go as far as to hate themselves. Do you value who you are? Or when you're with other people, do you sometimes feel you're not as important as they are? Not as valuable, not as worthwhile, not as talented, not as good-looking, not as intelligent? Or do you hold yourself right up there and value who you are? The answer to those questions reveals the degree of self-esteem that you feel. And self-esteem is that sense of worth that you place on the person that you are. It doesn't exist on a continuum. There are some people out here tonight who feel terrific. They think that they're wonderful, number one. There are some people out here tonight who were afraid to show up, afraid they wouldn't be dressed right, they wouldn't look as good as somebody else, embarrassed about showing up, afraid somebody would know that that meant they had low self-esteem. When in fact what we're going to do tonight is for everyone at whatever level of self-esteem you have. It exists on a continuum. It's not an either-or characteristic. It's not that you feel good about yourself or you don't feel good about yourself. Think of it as being on a scale of 0 to 10. And where you'd like to be ideally is 7 or above. Well, you may be 5 or 6, you may be lower, you may be an 8 or a 9, but even if you're high in self-esteem, what we're going to do tonight is going to help you maintain that, because self-esteem is like health. You can never have too much. And one of the myths about self-esteem is that too much of it isn't good. You should get a certain amount, feel good about yourself, but then kind of taper off, because if you don't, you're like one of those guys that's arrogant and conceited, thinks too much of themselves, goes around putting people down. Please get that myth out of your mind. The truth is this: you cannot have too much self-esteem. People with high self-esteem do think highly of themselves, do value themselves, but the test that determines whether it's truly high self-esteem or not is how they feel about others. A person with high self-esteem values themselves and values others equally. A person who has a camouflage for high self-esteem, it looks like self-esteem, it looks like confidence, but it's really arrogance and conceit, thinks highly of themselves, but not of anybody else. They have a need to put other people down, a need superior to other people. They gain the sense of worth that they parade around in at the expense of everyone around them. That's not high self-esteem. If you're arrogant, if you're conceited, if you think you're superior and nobody else is, if you think highly of yourselves but everybody else you question, as the old Quaker once said, all the world is queer save thee or me, and I'm not so sure about thee. That's arrogance masquerading as self-esteem. Because if you truly have self-esteem, you value the people around you. You understand that everybody has their story. And that value and worth is individual. It's not something that's attributed only to a few in this world. Why is it so important? Why do we talk so much about self-esteem? Why do psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health specialists make such a big deal about self-esteem? Why are we having a seminar on self-esteem tonight? For the same reason that this country is massively mobilizing to fight an epidemic that's sweeping across not only the United States, but around the world. That epidemic is called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's killing thousands upon thousands of people. It's a terrible disease. It's a disease that attacks the body by rendering it defenseless to the predators out in the environment. The things that most of us would fight off normally, a simple cold, will cause the onset of a fatal disease in a person with AIDS. They're not able to fight off all of those things that most of us live with every day. It's a terrible disease. Well, here's why self-esteem is important. Self-esteem is the immune system of the personality. When you have high self-esteem, the things that might break another person, you will go through. But with low self-esteem, every little event will devastate you. Lose a job, devastate you. Lose a relationship, devastate you. Be snubbed at a party, feel devastated. Low self-esteem makes you vulnerable to all of those things. You can't fight it off. It's absolutely crucial. We want to get rid of low self-esteem just as surely as we want to get rid of AIDS. It's crucial to mental health. There's not a psychogenic mental disorder that you can tell me. Look in the diagnostic and statistical manual. Go down the list and look at every one of them. There's not a one of them that's psychogenic, meaning it's not genetic, it's not organic, that doesn't involve self-esteem. As a matter of fact, I'll go as far as to say that there's no mental illness in the world where the patient wouldn't improve if you simply could give them an injection of self-esteem, because that makes them vulnerable to depression, makes them vulnerable to anxiety, vulnerable to all the problems of mental illness. It's crucial to your mental health to have high self-esteem. If I could do something, wave a magic wand, be king for a day, have one wish come true, I would wish that every child in the world would have high self-esteem. And the world tomorrow would be a totally different place than the world we live in. It's crucial to your personal success. How can you be successful when it involves striving, trying to achieve, trying to make something of yourself, if you don't believe you're worthy? People with low self-esteem don't bother taking the extra step. Don't bother pushing themselves. Don't bother challenging their abilities because they know what their abilities are. Not much. I don't do that well. No, I'd probably just make everybody laugh at me if I tried that. You know people like that? You can't be successful with low self-esteem. Even if you stumbled on it, somehow you got some success. You won the lottery. You got $32 million. You'd find a way to fritter it away if you had low self-esteem, because the sense of being undeserving and unworthy would cause that to happen. I've had patients who have inherited $1 million and within a year were broke. They didn't feel deserving of that success. So you've got to have self-esteem to be successful, and you've got to have self-esteem to stay successful. It's crucial to that. It's also crucial to interpersonal success. The famous Viennese psychiatrist Erich Fromm, in his book, The Art of Loving, said the degree to which we hate others is in direct proportion to the degree to which we hate ourselves. Now, there are multiple research studies to prove that people with low self-esteem are the ones who have the highest incidence of racial intolerance, the highest incidence of prejudice. They're always looking for someone to look down on. As a matter of fact, you know the person who has the highest degree of prejudice in the United States, according to the research? It's the so-called Southern white trash. The individual who is down south and has nobody to look down on except somebody of color. And they have the highest degrees of prejudice. They're the ones that want to get in that KKK because it gives them a feeling of importance, looking down on somebody else. Be careful. What Peter says about Paul tells you more about Peter than it does about Paul. The comments and criticisms and put-downs that you make of other people that you think show how perceptive you are and how you can spot all of these weaknesses in individuals only reveals to a discerning eye that you don't think much of yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to inflate your sense of worth by deflating the worth that other people have. It's crucial to interpersonal success. How can you be intimate, for instance, with low self-esteem? When you believe yourself to be unworthy, when intimacy involves being vulnerable, opening up and sharing who you are, letting another person in down into the deepest part of your psyche, letting them see the real you. All of us have a facade. All of us put up a front that we hope is going to be pleasing. But intimacy means parting the curtains, peeling back the layers, and letting someone on the inside. And when you believe that inside isn't valuable, isn't worthy, isn't deserving, you're going to want to keep them away. You know those strong guys in the relationship? I say strong with quotes around the word. Who are confident, or so it seems, who can handle things, and competent, but you can never get close to them. They'll never open up. They never share. They never let you know what they're feeling on the inside, never show you that vulnerable inner core. The reason for that is low self-esteem. Oh, you see the facade, and the facade says, I like myself. I'm just fine. Matter of fact, I'm better than most people I know. That's a dead giveaway right there, of course. Remember, that's one of our clues. Do they have self-esteem? Well, how do they feel about others? Not how do they feel about themselves. Yeah, it's a given they're going to think well of themselves, but how do they feel about others? High self-esteem, they value others. They find them worthy. Low self-esteem, I'm the best game in town. Nobody else is any good. So how can you be intimate? Low self-esteem robs you of intimacy in interpersonal relationships. How can you share? How can you be close to that one you love when you believe that letting her in may cause her to see something that will cause her to leave? The answer is, of course, you don't. You wear a suit of armor. You keep yourself protected. The single most important thing you could do if you are interested in improving your relationships, and tonight we're focusing on the one you have with yourself, but if you're interested in improving your interpersonal relationships, before you take an interpersonal skills training course, before you read a book on communication, before you do all of these things, go to Dale Carnegie, the single most important thing you can do is to work on building your self-esteem. Because the better you feel about you, the more successful you will be in interpersonal relationships. This isn't just an observation. This is the result of much research. The best marriages, the best relationships occur between people who like themselves. And then they have something to give. You've heard me say so many times, you can't give out of an empty bucket. You got to have it before you can give it. And if you don't have love for yourself, you can't love another person. So what is this thing? What is this thing called self-esteem? What does it consist of? What are people like that have high self-esteem? Want to rate yourself? Don't get a piece of paper unless you want to write this down, but in your mind, tabulate, calculate. On a scale of 0 to 10, make a little mental note and say, well, I'm a 6 on that one. I'm a 7 on that one. I'm going to give you the 4 building blocks of self-esteem. Now, my doctoral dissertation was on the development of self-esteem. There's not a piece of research on self-esteem around that I haven't read. And self-esteem consists of 4 things. After all is said and done, when it's all boiled down, 4 things are in self-esteem. Rate yourself on these 4 things. Number 1, significance. People with self-esteem have a sense of significance. What does that really mean? That means they feel worthy of attention, approval, and affection. Put another way, they feel worthy of being listened to. They feel that what they have to say is worth hearing, worthy of attention. They feel worthy of approval. When they do something good, they feel deserving of the compliments that come. They don't say, oh, you don't mean that, or you're just saying that to be nice, or I appreciate it, but I know I didn't do very good. They say, thank you, appreciate that. They feel worthy of approval, and they feel worthy of affection. When someone says, I care about you, they don't grab for their wallet. You know, let me tell you something really interesting of people with high self-esteem. They tend to be gullible. They can be preyed upon by con men because they're predisposed to trust, to believe that people care about them, to believe that people want to do good for them, to believe that people are interested in them. Why shouldn't they be? And so someone can use them if they're not careful. That's the problem they've got to look out for, to realize there are predators out there. But they believe that they're worthy of attention, approval, and affection. Now, how do you rate yourself? On a scale of 0 to 10. I have a sense of significance. I believe I'm worthy of being heard. What I have to say is interesting. It's worth listening to. I believe I do things that are deserving of compliments. I'm worth being approved of. And I believe I'm deserving of affection. When someone cares about me, when someone's tender towards me, when someone expresses loving behavior toward me, that doesn't scare me. That doesn't surprise me. Why shouldn't they? I'm worthy of that. Rate yourself. Okay? Number 2, competence. People with high self-esteem have a sense of competence. They feel capable. And most specifically, they feel capable of coping with life. Have you ever known people that are staying in a bad relationship where they're being brutalized, beaten up physically and or verbally? There's no reason in the world to maintain that relationship. It's not healthy, it's not good, it's not going to change, but they don't leave. And one of the reasons they don't leave is because they fear they can't take care of themselves on their own. They lack a sense of competence. I can cope. Little things like handling a checkbook. Ladies, let me tell you something. If you don't do it already, and I realize the 90s generation is changing and most women are doing this already, but if you're not yet, you haven't picked up on it, start right now. Don't ever let yourself become trapped in a relationship because you can't live without it. You'll never get the relationship you need until you no longer need the relationship. Can you handle a checkbook? Can you handle taxes? Can you handle auto insurance? Little simple things like that. One of the things we did in the mental health clinic that I ran for so many years, and working with people with very devastated self-esteem, was to train them in simple coping skills so they could cope with the basic necessities of life. What's your sense of competence? Of course, people with high self-esteem not only feel that they can cope with life, I can do those things that are necessary to get me through this world, they also feel better than the average person in at least one skill. Is there one skill in which you feel, by golly, I'm better than the average person in that? I don't care if it's basket weaving. It doesn't have to be trigonometry. It doesn't have to be computer programming. It doesn't have to be quantum physics. It could be needlepoint. But there's one thing. You say, by golly, in that one thing, I'm better than the average person. Not a better person, but have a better skill than the average person in that one thing. People with high self-esteem feel they can cope with life, they feel confident, and they've got at least one thing where they feel like, by golly, I do that better than most. Competence. How do you rate yourself? 0 to 10. Number 3, power. People with high self-esteem have a sense of power. Now, what that means is not this kind of power, although interestingly enough, and I'm going to make a couple of enemies right now, a lot of bodybuilders have low self-esteem, and they have confused physical power with personal power. Not the same. And they get the big muscles, and the self-esteem doesn't change. They got to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And they'll take steroids to make them bigger. Power in self-esteem means this: the degree to which you feel capable of making choices about your life. I can choose those things I need to choose to make my life better. I have the ability to influence things and events and people. I've got a sense of power. I act on life. I don't sit back passively and react to life. I act on life. I have power. If I don't like what's going on, I can choose a better road. If I don't like the way things are turning out, I can change them. People with low self-esteem, of course, feel powerless. What am I going to do? If the boss doesn't like me, I'll never be successful in the job. People with high self-esteem say, I can either get promoted because of that guy or in spite of him. But I'm the one who has the influence to make it happen. Where do you rate yourself on a sense of power? I can do something with my life. I can make choices. I have an influence. I'm not helpless. 4. This one is interesting. The research says it belongs there. And I don't want you to get spiritual on me or mystical, because it's not really that, although the word has been associated with that for so long. People with high self-esteem have a sense of virtue, a sense of integrity. What that really means is they believe that there's a certain way to live life. They have standards. They stand for something. They believe in something. And when they look at the way that they act and what they value and believe in, they say, I'm doing pretty good. My life exemplifies what I say I believe. I believe in honesty. I'm honest. I believe in loyalty. It's important in a relationship. And I'm loyal. I believe in being open and vulnerable and caring. And I am open and vulnerable and caring. Maybe not 100%, but more than not. Sense of virtue. People with low self-esteem don't really know what's important. Their values change from group to group, from day to day, from fad to fad, because they don't really know what to believe in. Since they judge what they believe in terms of how much approval it will get them from others, they become victims of their social group. And if their social group decides they're going to all get together and run off a cliff, the low self-esteem lemmings trail right along saying, this doesn't make sense, but everybody else is doing it, so here we go. Crash dive. Think about that in terms of teenagers in the high schools and drug use and promiscuity. I want to get approval. If everybody's doing it, doesn't make any difference if I've got a standard. I've got to get that approval because I don't have it from within. So you can see why high self-esteem helps a person live a life of integrity. Now, where do you rate yourself? 0 to 10. If your average score is 7 or above, you're in pretty darn good shape. What we're going to do tonight is give you reinforcement for that, strengthen that, help you get a handle on that, so if there's any chance at all that it was just fortuitous that your self-esteem is high and you really don't have a handle on how to do it, you're going to leave with that handle and know exactly what you need to do. In order to correct self-esteem problems, it's important to understand where self-esteem comes from or doesn't come from, where it ought to be and how many times it's missing in our lives. Let me take you back a little bit. Let me take you back to a strange situation that most of us never think about. How did that baby come to know that it was a me? How do we get to know that we're me? I did an internship at Stanford on early childhood development, actually. We worked with preemies, babies who were born prematurely, because we found that there was a problem with prematurely born babies, 2 problems, as a matter of fact. They had psychomotor retardation, and they acquired language later than babies who were born at term. We wondered, why do they have this psychomotor retardation? Why don't they acquire language as they should? Like they're a month premature. What does that do? What does that cause? That's fascinating. Bear with me for a minute. I get into this kind of stuff. You may not. The brain gets organized sequentially. All the aspects of the brain get organized, like number 1 gets organized first. Number 1 happens to be the sense of taste, gustatory sense. The first sense to get organized in a baby is the gustatory one, taste. Consequently, a baby under the age of 3 months acquires its perception of the world through its mouth. Everything that the baby comes in contact with goes right here. Feet, hands, rattles, bottles, nipples, whatever, right here. Because the sense of taste is well developed. The other senses haven't developed yet. And then, secondly, comes the olfactory sense. That's when the baby begins to acquire knowledge of its world because of smell. And then third is the tactual, acquiring a knowledge of the world through touch. And then kinesthetic, through movement at about the age of 12 or 13 months. And then auditorily, hearing, and finally, the last sense to get developed, visual, seeing. Now let's go back to that baby. The baby's lying in the crib. You and the father of this child have picked out the most charming name. It's Bruce. This kid is going to be Bruce for the rest of his life. You've already got him labeled. Baby doesn't know that he's Bruce yet. Consequently, can't resent you just yet. How does the baby even know that it is something that needs a name? Well, the research that we've done tells us that the earliest sense of self that we develop comes from either sucking our mother's breast or a bottle or a rattle. Now, don't do this, but imagine it, if you will. You can do it later if you want to. If you do, people are going to look at you and think you're funny, but imagine sucking your thumb. Okay, sucking your thumb. When you suck your thumb, the perceptions exist within your body, and you feel it from head to toe. And that feeling gives you a sense of unity as a person. You begin to acquire a sense of me and that. When the baby sucks the rattle, it's localized sensation. It doesn't unify the baby. And so the baby gets the sense of that's that, and this is me. And as the baby sucks itself, puts its hand in his mouth, his feet in his mouth, and begins to acquire this sense of self, it continues on through smell. The baby now recognizes mama's smell, her distinct smell, and daddy's smell, his distinct smell. You can put a blindfold on a baby and give them to a stranger, and they'll cry because it smells different than what they're used to. And that sense of that and me is getting developed even further. And then there's touch. We touch the baby. Interestingly enough, I did a research study on gymnastics and self-esteem because we knew that touching a baby helped the baby get a stronger sense of its outline, its physical sense of self. And that touching was very necessary to the child's development. And children who were not touched early in life had high mortality rates and problems later in life, problems with giving and receiving affection. Many of them had a thing we call anaclitic depression, this depression that comes out of nowhere and stays and stays and stays, yet there's no life event you can point to. It's just a sense of emptiness and loss. And you go back early in their childhood and you find out they were babies that laid in the crib hour after hour after hour and weren't touched. As a matter of fact, right here in the United States, several years ago now, fortunately, we discovered that babies in orphanages had 3 times the mortality rate of babies in intact homes. They were dying like crazy, and it was strange because usually in the orphanage they got better food, more regular food, better health care. Doctors came to see them and check them up, but they were dying 3 times more than babies in homes. Somebody made the astute observation that nobody was touching the children. The nurses were going to the cribs and propping bottles up on pillows. Propping bottles up on pillows, bottles up on pillows, like an assembly line of feeding. And the babies lay there hour after hour after hour. And without a sense of touch, they developed a condition little known to most people, but very much known to pediatricians and psychologists, called marasmus. It's a wasting disease, where the mind and the body just gradually atrophy and deteriorate until a person dies. It occurs to the very young and the very old in our society, when they're ignored by the in-between group. They changed the mortality rates in orphanages, and all they did was require that the babies be touched once every half hour. Just going through the cribs and picking them up and touching them. Isn't that terrific? Now what we discovered is that that touch was crucial to these preemies. They needed extra touch, but they needed something else too. They needed movement. That the brain gets organized to its fullest extent in the last 6 weeks of pregnancy. And the movement in the mother's womb is necessary to let the brain evolve so that it becomes complete and normal. And when the baby is born prematurely, it's brought out of the mother, placed in a crib, and doesn't move. We instituted one change in the incubators. We made them rock. so that premature babies were put in the incubator, and the incubator would rock slowly. Psychomotor retardation went right back down to normal. Language skills came right back up to normal with nothing but rocking. Now, mamas and you daddies, remember holding that infant? You placed that infant close to you, and what did you do? Instinctively. No one taught it to you. No one said you better do this. There's no book that you read that said this is advisable. You held that baby close, and instinctively you started rocking, didn't you? You had to move. Try to hold a baby and not move. You can't do it. You just gotta. Try to hold a baby and not touch it. Gotta get those hands on it. Two essentials to normal development: touch and movement. We need that for self-esteem. And many of you people out there, if you have a problem with your self-esteem, can trace the beginning origins of it back to not getting the touching and the closeness that you needed at a crucial time in your life. And ever after, you have a hunger for it, but difficulty accepting it. Now we've got that baby and knows that it's a me. Feels a sense of separateness. As a matter of fact, that occurs right about 6 months of age, because now you put the baby down. Wah! Remember that? Now you leave the baby with a stranger and we get wah! Separation anxiety, we call it. Where'd the baby get that? Didn't have that when it was born. Because now he knows he's a he. He's a me. There's a sense of separate selfhood there. We got that now. Now, what is the identity of that self? We begin to label the child. Now the labels start coming. First label, of course, is Bruce or Agnes. We got a name for that baby, but oh, there's so much more labeling that goes on in homes than that, isn't there? Don't drop it, clumsy. What's the matter with you? Can't you do anything right? Don't do that. You don't do that well. And we start labeling the child's behaviors, labeling the child's feelings, labeling the child's experiences, and all of those labels come together to form me, my identity. That identity is so crucial to development. We will hold on to it even if we don't like it. Whether it's a good one or not, we'll do our best not to lose it, because identity is crucial. I had a patient come to me one time. He says, well, Dr. Murray, says, you'll certainly be glad to have me for a patient. I perked up. I never heard that one before. Yeah. Normally sit back a little somnolent, you know, but perked right up, and I said, oh, why is that? He said, well, he said, the last shrink I went to, pardon me, no offense, last shrink I went to told me that I was a classic anxiety neurotic. He was so proud. He said he'd never seen anybody who was such a classic anxiety neurotic. He got the textbook out. He said my symptoms were classic textbook symptoms. Never seen anybody such a classic anxiety neurotic. Who was he? A classic anxiety neurotic. He finally had an identity. Well, I knew what I was dealing with, and I looked at him carefully, gave him that pregnant pause, which means I'm going to say something important now. Pay attention. And I said, tell me, who are you if you're not a classic anxiety neurotic? He shriveled in the chair in front of me, just like pull the plug out of his inner tube. And a little pathetic voice came out of him, and he said, well, then I guess I'm nobody. I said, in that case, it's going to be darn difficult for you to give up your symptoms, isn't it? Who wants to go from something classic to a nobody? For him to get well was to lose the only meaningful identity he'd had. He was classic. Any teachers out there? You ever have a student in your classroom that you knew, doggone it, was proud of being the worst kid on the campus? Oh my God, he's in my room this year? And he smiles. Had a kid one time that came in. His father had sent him down because he was getting straight F's. Figured I could fix him up. I knew the relationship and I knew what was going on here, and I said, tell me, get straight F's, do you? When you get straight F's and you bring that report card home and you show that to your dad, I bet you he really doesn't like it. And he looked at me and he kind of said a little straighter and he said, he hates it. Gotcha. That identity is crucial. Who are you? Are you walking around with an identity that you really don't like? I'm not very good with people. I don't do that well. I have trouble with relationships, never really been successful yet. You know what you're doing, of course. You're saying that's me. And since identity is essential to survival, you can't change, can you? Unless there's a guarantee that you can have another identity that's more valuable. You can't change from those symptoms that you have if that's the only thing that gives you a sense of self, if that's who you are. Sure, you'd like to be better, you'd like to be successful, you'd like to be loved, you'd like to have a good relationship, but if you don't do that well, you know it's not going to happen, so how can you give that up? The answer is you can't. Every therapist has had the patient who, no matter what kind of therapy you gave them and you broke your back and you were good, you were darn good, and you did everything, you went above and beyond the call of duty, and nothing changed that patient. Because their symptoms were all they had standing between them and total anonymity. Why is it so hard to change? Why do we hang on to these negative things that we believe about ourselves that prevent us from being successful? We don't like it. Why do we do it? It's a little thing called homeostasis. Homeostasis biologically, I'm going to bore you again for a minute, but I get into this stuff, so I got to tickle myself occasionally so I keep interested. Homeostasis comes from two Greek words. You knew that, of course. Homeo means same and stasis means level. And it refers to the tendency of the organism to maintain its living systems on a level. The psychological equivalent of biological homeostasis is a thing we call cognitive dissonance. This is another great one. At Stanford, where they first began to investigate this phenomenon back in 1955, and they since have had over 500 research studies, if there is a fact in psychology, call it the soft science, if there's a fact in psychology, it is this fact. The brain operates under cognitive dissonance. What does that mean, Murray? Break it down. No psychobabble. What it means is that the brain cannot tolerate the presence of inconsistent cognitions and will reduce the discrepancy in favor of the pre-existing cognition. There, now it's clear. Make it better? Okay. That means your brain can't accept that you're pretty and ugly, that you're short and tall, that you're smart and stupid. It can only accept one of them. And when the inconsistency comes in, for instance, I tell a person who grew up being told they were dumb. And because they were told they were dumb, they acted dumb. And they got feedback that said they were dumb when they acted dumb, because they were being dumb then. And I come along and say, boy, you are one smart cookie. Cognitive dissonance. Wait a minute. I'm dumb. I can't be dumb and smart. The brain will reduce the discrepancy in favor of the pre-existing cognition. And here's how it will work. I know I'm dumb, but he says I'm smart. How can I make this harmonize? You're just trying to be nice. Or, what do you want? And now it's all in harmony. Now I can still be dumb, and I can understand why you're saying I'm smart. It's not because I'm smart, it's because you want something, because I know I'm dumb. Any parents out there who have a little girl who's just as cute as the Dickens? And you tell her how pretty she is one day, and she says, "Oh, Mama, I'm not pretty. Susie's pretty. I'm not pretty." I mean, look at these freckles. Look at this tooth missing. She has the belief that she's not attractive, and nothing you can say will change that belief. Well, your mama. I used to have patients say to me, because I used to try to give good feedback when I was a novice therapist. I used to believe that this person's got the wrong message. I'll give them the right message. I'll straighten them right out. We don't need to take a lot of time. They were wrong when I was in school. This can happen quick. They think they're dumb. I can see that they're smart. I'll just tell them, and it's be over. You know, it's finished. They're going to be happy. And so I would say nice things to them. Not really nice things, just accurate things. It really was who they were. Have no impact whatsoever. And one day I asked a patient, I said, "How is it that I can tell you that you're intelligent and you can continue to insist that you're dumb?" He says, "Well, it's nice of you to say that, but I'm paying you to say nice things." Oh, cognitive dissonance. The dissonance has been reduced. Now they know why the environment says the things that it does, and they can keep the identity that they had, even though it was ineffective. We have another variation of that. And there are a number of words for it that you may have run across in your studies. The labeling effect, self-consistency theory. Self-consistency theory says that we tend to act in manners that are consistent with our image of ourselves. We don't believe we're very smart, we will act not very smart. We don't believe people like us very much, we will create a world that doesn't like us very much. We will keep the world consistent with what we believe ourselves to be. Labeling, we will tend to act in accordance with the labels that we're giving. The expectancy effect, we will tend to produce those behaviors that we believe are expected of us. Interesting study on this one. I participated in one of these studies at the University of Santa Clara with rats. Graduate students, who weren't real bright, by the way, I know I was one, were given a bunch of rats, and they were told by the professors, the wise, the smart ones, that these were rats that had been tested and were found to be subnormal in rat intelligence. These were not smart rats. These were dumb rats. And what we wanted them to do was to learn how to teach these rats to run a maze. We want your rat to learn how to run a maze. And the idea was to use their behavior modification theories and all of that, and to time how fast the rat ran the maze and see if they could get those rats to run them fast. They then took the second batch of rats, which were randomly halved from the first batch, same rats, and gave them to another group of graduate students and said, "These rats have been bred selectively and are brilliant rats. These are smart rats. So they're going to learn how to run this maze really quickly." The expectancy effect. Guess what happened? The dumb rats didn't learn how to run the maze. Those that did took several days. The smart rats learned to run the maze in under a minute each. We observed the graduate students working with the rats. The people who had the dumb rats rarely fed them, rarely gave them water. After all, they're dumb. What's the loss? Pick them up by the nape of the neck, throw them into the maze. Run, stupid. Dumb rat can't even go after cheese. There's cheese down there, idiot. Go. They said they were dumb rats. And the ones who had the smart rats took them home as pets, sat in class with the rats running around their shoulders, fed them little delicacies that they brought from home, would pick them up and hold them and take them over to the maze. "All right, Henry, we're going to have you run the maze now. Come on, Henry. I know you can do it, Henry." They were loving, they were caring, they were nurturing, and those smart rats did terrific. You say, yeah, but those are rats. I will resist the temptation to compare them to people. Let me tell you about people. In a New York school district, they picked a borough that was having a lot of difficulty. I think nowadays it could have been any borough in New York, but they found a really bad one then, where the kids were underachievers, having all kinds of violence, gang-related activities, drug use, et cetera, all the problems you don't want. They divided the group randomly and told one teacher, we have picked out some of the most incorrigible students in our school. We know that they're a handful. We're really sorry to do this to you, but we'd like you to take them for a term and do the best you can. Don't worry if it doesn't turn out real good. We won't blame you. They then took from the same batch the same hard-nosed delinquent kids and gave them to another teacher and said, these kids are delinquent. They have a lot of trouble in school, but we have had them all tested, and they have incredible potential. They're all brilliant. They all have great learning expectancies. We know with the right kind of care, they will excel in your classroom. Go for it. I'll give you 3 guesses what happened after a term with those students. The poor, dumb, incorrigible delinquents were worse than they were when they started, and the teacher had pulled out great masses of hair. And these delinquent children with the exceptional potential and ability with just needing some nurturance scored higher than average on the achievement test. The expectancy effect. What do you expect of yourself? Because when you have that expectancy, you create the reality, and then in a flash of brilliance say, I knew it. People aren't going to like me. And people stay away from you. And the person goes home saying, I knew it. I went, I tried, not my fault. Creating the world that they expect to be the world they have to live in. What expectancies do you have of yourself about love, about success in life, in relationships, ability to learn, ability to handle crisis? One of the symptoms of low self-esteem is that people with low self-esteem have a sense of internal control versus external control. And what that means is this. A number of years ago, a psychologist by the name of Roeder developed a little test called Roeder's internal-external locus of control scale. You're all familiar with it. And that scale was intended to examine whether a person believed that what happened to them in their life was the result of chance or self-control. Was it luck and fate or perseverance and hard work? Externals were individuals who believed that their life was controlled by luck, fate, who they knew, getting the breaks, being in the right place at the right time, and, heaven forbid, the star that they were born under. I don't do that. I'm Scorpio. We're not good at that. Isn't it incredible how people say that and it's almost like they're relieved? You know, I'm a Taurus. We don't have good interpersonal relationships. Whew. Well, that explains that. It's got nothing to do with being dull and boring. It's Taurus, man. People with low self-esteem have a sense of external control. They see their world as controlled by events outside of them, over which they have relatively little or no control. And they feel helpless much of the time. They hope they'll get lucky. Let me tell you something. I've never done this research study, but I'm absolutely convinced I know the results. That's not good science, I know that, but I know what the results would be. If I was to do a self-esteem test for every person who bought a lottery ticket, I would find that the compulsive buyers of lottery tickets, not the occasional, I think I'll take a chance, but the compulsive buying of lottery tickets, I'll bet you, has a high, incredibly high percentage of people with low self-esteem. Because the research says that they have the most incredibly difficult times working carefully, sequentially, and persistently at a task because they don't believe it will pay off. But they believe they might just one day get lucky. And so they buy lotto tickets, and they hope for a break, and maybe it'll happen tonight. Here I am, world. Didn't happen. Oh, well. Externals have a sense of low self-esteem. Low self-esteem people have a sense of external control. Let me be a little more specific with you. Think about your neighbor as I go over this. Obviously, none of these will be true of you, so you'll want to have a model. Here are 7 characteristics of low self-esteem. Remember, self-esteem is not an either-or characteristic. It's by degrees. So you may find some of these a little bit true of you, some of them a lot true of you. But if you find most of them really you, talk to me later. Number 1, a sensitivity to criticism. People with low self-esteem have a hypersensitivity to criticism. They feel criticized when you were trying to compliment them. They hear criticism when you weren't even talking about them, because they believe their world is hostile. They don't want their weaknesses pointed out. They regard their weaknesses as proof that they're not lovable, not deserving of success, and God forbid somebody should notice it. And so they're very careful that anybody might pay attention to their weaknesses. Ironically, what many of them do is to point out the weaknesses before you can to get the uncertainty over with. I have a wart on the inside of my mouth, you know. Just so you think I didn't know. I know. They view their weaknesses as proof of their inferiority, and it accentuates the pain of anticipated rejection. A guy came to see the shrink one day, and he says, "Doc," he says, "I need help." He says, "What is it, sir?" He said, "I have an inferiority complex." Doctor says, "All right, let's do a complete round of testing on you, really check this thing out." After 2 days of extensive testing, the doctor called him into the office. He says, "I have the results." "What is it?" "You do not have an inferiority complex. You are inferior." People with low self-esteem feel that way, and they're afraid that any weakness or deficiency or inadequacy that you notice will be proof of that, and they won't be worth your love. So they're hypersensitive to criticism. Number 2, they have a hypercritical attitude. Not only they're very sensitive to someone criticizing them, they throw the first stone. It's like putting a left jab in somebody's face so he can't set up to hit you with a right cross. Know what I mean, guys? It's getting in the first punch. So people with low self-esteem will tell you what was wrong with everything that they saw, everyone that they met, everywhere that they went. They got a list of all the deficiencies. They've already got it started about halfway through about this evening. All the things that were wrong with this evening, wrong with the speaker, wrong with the music. And the more things they can find wrong, the more comfortable they feel. Everybody else is no good too. It redirects attention away from their own limitations, their own sense of inadequacy, and creates the illusion of superiority. Because after all, if they set themselves up as judge and jury, isn't that a superior position? And if I can pick out all the faults in everybody else, doesn't that give me an advantage? Somehow suggest I'm a better person? The third thing that they do is they have an inappropriate response to flattery. An inappropriate response to flattery. They either overreact and attempt to expand it like, "Oh, you don't mean that, do you? Really? I mean, that part about when that was okay too? Really? Well, what about when, it's like, tell me more. It's like you say, God, I wish I kept my mouth shut. You know, just want to say your hair was nice. And I don't want to compare it to every hairstyle you've ever had in your life, or every hairstyle that was in Hollywood or I'd seen in a magazine, you know. Your hair looks nice, for God's sake. Leave it alone. But they want to milk it and milk it and milk it and milk it. So they either overreact and try to expand it and draw it out. It's like the only time they've eaten all year. You know? Give me more. Or they deny it. No, it's not true. You're just saying that. No, don't say it. Because they don't believe it to be true. And they're afraid that if they accept it, you can take it from them. You ever have anybody hold out something desirable, maybe a $10 bill? There's not much nowadays. Let's make a $100 bill, okay? Inflation. $100 bill. Now we're getting interested. $1,000 bill. Somebody holds out a $1,000 bill. Now we got your interest? Puts it right in your hands. You ever have anybody do something like that, and then you go to reach for it, and they go, ah! Gotcha! That's how these people react to compliments and approval. It's like they're afraid that there it is. It looks wonderful. Probably would feel great. I would love to have that. But I ain't touching it. Just as soon as I accept that, they'll pull it back. My hair looks nice? Thank you very much. But your nose is huge. Oh, God. Yeah. Inappropriate response to flattery. Number 4, they have a tendency to blame. They cannot accept personal deficiency, even though they will blame themselves internally. And so they try to find a reason for the failure. See, they ultimately fear that every weakness, every deficiency, every mistake, every error is proof of their unlovability, and they must fight that if they're going to get any love in this world. You ever know a person who had a lot of faults, but being wrong wasn't one of them? See, a person with high self-esteem knows that they're lovable, and it's not predicated on how adequate they are, how perfect they are, how good they are, how nice they are, how talented they are, how intelligent they are. It's because they are. And so if they do something wrong, you say, yeah, that was me, I blew it. Sometimes I do. I'll try harder next time. No big deal. Their acceptance or rejection isn't based upon their perfection. The 5th thing is a feeling of persecution. People with low self-esteem believe that others are out to get them. He's trying to make me look bad. He wants me to fail. He did that on purpose. I've got a boss who sets me up. You see, if these are the reasons for their lack of success, then it's not them, you see, and you can love them. Because it wasn't them, it was the boss that set them up. It's pathetic, it's sad, it's tragic. It's low self-esteem. Number 6, they're negative about competition. They're eager to win. Of course they'd like to win, but they expect to lose. And so they're either overly competitive and they drive and drive and drive. You ever play a guy and it's the 42nd set of tennis and he hasn't won one but one more game? Because if he goes home now, it's proof that he's terrible, he's bad. So they either play and make excuses or they refuse to play. Don't participate, and nobody can reject you when you don't do well. And number 7, they have a tendency towards seclusiveness and special groups, or they avoid people altogether. Either they will pull off to themselves and find a little strange group that they can join, and usually it's one of those us four and no more groups. You know what I mean? We got the answer, everybody else has the questions. It can be a religious group, it can be a political group, it can be an ethnic group, but they're in their little group now. An antidote to low self-esteem. My little group and I are wonderful, everybody else is bad. The test for what your group means to you is not how much you enjoy your group, not how loyal you are to each other, not how intensely you bind yourselves together. The test is, how do you feel about people not in your group? If it's not a low self-esteem group, you feel fine about them. They're just not in your group, that's okay. But if it's a low self-esteem group, because they're no good, or they ought to be if they wanted to be good. All of this is part of this terrible thing that I have chosen to call psychological AIDS, low self-esteem. And we can laugh about it and we can joke about it, but I hope there's a place in every one of your hearts tonight as you've been listening so far that understands the tragedy of this thing. The kids who can't learn in school because self-esteem is the problem. The relationships that break up because they got into the relationship to try to feel better about themselves, and it's making them feel worse, and they're angry at the other person. The lives that are destroyed because of low self-esteem. Just watch the news. Something has to be done, and by golly, we're going to do it. All right, so what do we do about this thing? How do we fix it? Or how do we strengthen the self-esteem that we already have and make it even better than it was? We talked about the problems. Let's not reiterate. Let's not summarize. Let's just say there are problems with self-esteem. What is the solution? Here is a step-by-step method to powerful self-esteem. Number one, affirm your present worthiness. Affirm your present worthiness. An old Hindu proverb says that at one time all men were gods, but human man erred. And the council of gods got together and decided that they must punish man for his error. And they couldn't think of a punishment, and one said, let's take away his godhood. He'll no longer be a god. They all agreed that was a terrific idea. Let's take away his godhood. That'll teach him a lesson. But then they thought, but how do we do that? A godhood is indestructible. We can't destroy it. We have to put it someplace where he can't get it. How do we do that? One person said, I have the answer. What we do is we put it on top of the highest mountain on the earth. K2, freezing temperatures. He'd become a block of ice if he tried to get up there. He'll never find it there. And they all agreed that was a good idea, and one of them said, no, it's not going to work. You know, man. He loves a challenge. He'll see that mountain. He'll say, I think I'll climb that. Somebody will say, why? He says, because it's there. And I'm going to climb that mountain. And when he does, he'll find his godhood. It won't work. Sooner or later, he'll climb the highest mountain. Another said, I've got it. What we do is we bury it deep in the ground. Just bury it deep. They all thought that was a good idea. One of them said, no, it won't work. You know, man, he's greedy. He's always looking for wealth. He'll dig into the ground looking for ore of some type, gold, diamonds, whatever, and sooner or later he'll dig deep enough and he'll find it. It's not safe there. We can't do that. One said, I've got the perfect answer. What we do is, he's not a fish. We'll find the deepest part of the ocean, the Marianas Trench off of the Philippines. We'll put it at the very bottom, over 7,000 feet deep. He'll never get it there. They all agreed that was a great idea, and the old cynic said, it won't work. You know how inventive he is and how he likes to discover things. Sooner or later, he'll get a bug under his saddle that he wants to find out what's going on under the ocean, and he'll invent a contraption that takes him down there, and he'll find it. Can't do it. Well, they're nonplussed. What do we do? We got to punish him. We got to take away his godhood, but where do we put it? And finally, from the back of the room of the Council of Gods, a little small voice from the eldest god there said, I have the perfect solution. They all turned. And he said, hide it deep within him. He'll never think to look for it there. I'm going to tell you the most profound thing about your self-esteem that you have ever heard or will ever hear. You may already know it, and that's great. But after I've said everything else, I want you to remember this. If you forget all of the rest, remember this. Have I made it important enough? Get this. You will never be more worthy than you are right now. Your self-esteem is not something that can be earned by improving your physical appearance, by increasing your number of achievements, by learning domination and control over people, by accumulating wealth and riches. You cannot deserve or earn self-esteem. It is your birthright. That baby in the crib doesn't have low self-esteem. It's as valuable as it will ever be. It has to be injured somewhere along the way to obscure that value. You will never be more worthy than you are right now. And the first step to building your self-esteem is to affirm that right now, fat, right now, short, right now, uneducated, right now, shy, right now, a peon, a nothing job. I am as worthy as I will ever be. There is nothing external you can do to increase your worth. Don't confuse self-respect with self-esteem. Respect is something you earn. It's based on your accomplishments. Boy, I'm proud of myself for doing that. That's great. But worth, value, that was yours when you were born. Somebody took it from you or blinded you to it, and that's what we're fighting. We're not trying to give you self-esteem. We're trying to reveal it to you. Get that if you don't get anything else. Number two, change the way you parent yourself. Change the way you parent yourself. All of us were parented, whether they were biological parents, adoptive parents, caretaking parents. We all got taken care of by somebody. Somebody parented us. And by so doing, they taught us subconsciously how to parent ourselves. It's as if somebody said, what shall we teach him to do when he makes a mistake? Teach him to ridicule and blame himself. What shall we teach her to believe when no one asks her to the prom? Teach her to believe it's because she's not attractive or desirable to the opposite sex. And we did this even though we loved our children. We talked to them, and we talked to them. I'm a member of the Board of Advisors of the Osmos Foundation. It's an international organization that's dedicated to building self-esteem in youth around the world. Prime Minister of Australia is in it. It's based in Sydney. Many other luminaries. I'm a part of it because I'm America's leading expert on words. I'm the only person recognized by the California Supreme Court as an expert in communication. And I know the importance of words, one word versus another, one phrase versus another. And we're trying to educate parents to the power that the words that they use with their children have on creating or diminishing their sense of worthiness. Listen to yourself. Talk to yourself. I had a guy one time that called me up. He was in Sacramento, and at the time I was running my medical clinic down in San Jose. And he asked me, he couldn't come down to San Jose, but he made it extremely attractive for me to jump in the car and drive to Sacramento. And described how wonderful Sacramento was. That's how he did it. Anyway, I went. And I got there and I went into this big office building, and it had his name on the building. I'm not going to give you his name for obvious reasons. His name's on the building. I'm already impressed. I mean, the money he was offering impressed me. Now, I went into this wonderful office after first going through his executive secretary, who was very professional. I looked around this beautiful office, and finally I sit down, and he looked at me and he said, "Dr. Murray, I want your help because I'm a failure." Right. I didn't say that, but I thought it. He said, "Oh, I know. I've got lots of money. I have many successes. And the average person out there looking at me would think they would love to be where I am." He says, "But what they don't understand is, inside I am miserable. I delay. I procrastinate. I put off. I avoid. It's a wonder I'm as successful as I am. I could be 10 times more successful if I wouldn't put things off so much. I just sit here at the desk some days, and before I know it, it's 5 o'clock, the day has gone by, and I don't know what I did. Can you help me?" By listening to him, it was easy for me to deduce what probably was going on. And so I said to him, "I want you to do something. You're serious about this, right?" "Oh, yes." "I thought you were." "I want you to get a notepad. This isn't going to be dictation. This is going to be very personal. And I want you to pick a day. I don't care when it is, but when you start, I want you to write down everything that you say to yourself in one 24-hour period. When you wake up in the morning, that notepad is on the nightstand. If you wake up at night and you're talking to yourself, you reach over and you write it down. Everything. It's going to pretty much ruin your day, but as you tell me, you do that by yourself already anyway." He laughed. It's not easy, but I promise you we can correct this if you'll do it. I'll do anything. I came back a week later, had a notepad in his hand. Threw it on the desk. He says, "I don't know what you're going to get out of that. I don't like looking at it." I said, We're fond of saying, I looked at the notepad, and it went something like this. I can remember it still. "That's the alarm clock, stupid. Get up. You're going to lay here and be late for work again? Can't you do anything right? For God's sake, at least get your keister out of bed and get to work. Get up." Continued like that, brushing his teeth, combing his hair, getting dressed. Abuse heaped upon ridicule, heaped upon sarcasm. And this notepad went on page after page after page of the internal dialogue this man lived with every day. And it was the most abusive, horrendous language you can imagine. He called himself names that if somebody else had called him, he'd get a gun and shoot him. But when he called himself that, it sank deeper than if anybody else had said it. I said to him, "Here's my question to you. That secretary out, you know, the one you got, she's very good, very professional." "Oh, she's terrific. I couldn't run this business without her." I said, "Well, tell me, she's that good, you really value her and you want her to work effectively. Just imagine that you talked to her the way you talk to yourself. What do you think she would do?" He said, "Oh, she'd quit." I gave him that pregnant pause, which means that was really good. Think about that. And he said, "Oh, that's what I've done, isn't it? I've quit." That the little child inside of him was saying to the big adult who was so mean and abusive, Call me those names, I'll make you lose money. I'll make you fail. I'll show you. I won't go to work. And that was what was going on. Many of you, if you talk to your best friend the way you talk to yourself, how long do you think they would remain your best friend? Not very long. The second thing you need to do is to change the way you parent yourself. Get in touch with your internal dialogue and knock off the abuse. Just ask yourself, if I talked to another person that way when they were late to work, what would they do? If I talked to another person that way when they'd forgotten something the boss asked them to do, what would they do? Would that enhance their potential or diminish it? Would that help them overcome or hinder their success? Change the way that you talk to yourself. Talk to yourself in ways that you would talk to a person that you wanted to encourage, that you wanted to inspire, that you wanted to bring out the best in. Learn how to do that. And many of you, ironically, with low self-esteem, do it to others, but not to you. I understand you don't deserve it, but change the way you parent yourself. You are worthy just the way you are. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to talk to yourself that way. Dogs don't bark to prove they're dogs, do they? They bark because they're dogs. You're not going to accomplish something with your life to prove that you're worth something. You're going to acknowledge that you're worth something, and then you'll accomplish something. Change the way you parent yourself. Number 3, strengthen the 4 building blocks of self-esteem. Remember what they were? Significance, competence, power, and virtue. Strengthen those. Significance is the degree to which you feel worthy of attention, approval, and affection. Every time you feel like you'd like to say something and you hesitate because you're not sure anybody would listen to it, you diminish your sense of significance. The way you overcome that is to go ahead and talk because you're listening, because it's important to you. If the world won't sit down and pay attention to you, you pay attention to you. That's where it starts. I'm up here and you're listening to me, and I'm grateful for that. But I have something to say if you're not here. I believe things if you're not here. I think I'm worth listening to if nobody shows up. That's what I want you to do for you. I want you to give yourself approval. Catch yourself being good. You're good at catching yourself being bad. You're an expert at picking it out when you made a mistake. I taught psychology, and I went to a whiteboard. Used to be blackboards, now they're whiteboards. I went to a whiteboard at the beginning of a class one day of Psychology 1A. And I took a black marker, and I marked a black dot on the whiteboard. And then I went over to the side, and I said, "Class, can someone tell me what they see?" Well, everybody there saw the black dot. And I said, "Does anybody see the whiteboard the black dot is on?" Oh. When you look in the mirror at yourself, is the only thing you see the spinach on your tooth? Or do you stop for one moment and say, well, at least I've got teeth? Can you catch yourself looking good? Can you catch yourself doing something intelligent? Can you catch yourself being loving? All these things that are so wonderful, you do them, but you don't notice yourself doing them. In order to increase your sense of significance, you've got to start paying attention. I know you want other people to notice it, but you've got to notice it. There was a time in my life when my self-esteem was a microdot, almost non-existent. And I lay on a Navy bunk after getting drunk for the umpteenth time. High school dropout. I could tell you a long, sad story. I won't bore you. But I was miserable. And I was thinking I wanted to kill myself. And I began feeling sad because I figured nobody would show up at the funeral. God, I'm so terrible, nobody'll even come if I die. You ever do that? You kind of wallow in it, you know. God, this feels good, I'm going to do it again, you know. Really feeling miserable. And then I thought to myself, well, what do you want? What do you want? And a little voice came out of my head somewhere, almost like it was a separate part of me. And it said, I want to be respected. I want to be respected. And another little voice from the other side said, just as clear as a bell, why should anybody respect you? You don't even respect yourself. You ever have a thought that's like a crowbar between the eyes? That one gave me a jolt, a physical jolt. When it actually hit me, I didn't respect me and was trying to get everybody else to. The way I was doing it was by beating them up. I was a fighter. I fought every day. I figured something was wrong with the day. I wanted people to respect me, and what I got was fear. And it wasn't the same thing. Why should anybody respect you? You don't even respect yourself. You've got to start giving you what you want others to give. You've got to get good at that. And you know, the great thrill, the great discovery is once you become secure in establishing your own significance, you listen to yourself. You believe you've got something to say. You approve of yourself. You find yourself doing something good and you compliment it. And you give yourself tender, loving care. You say nourishing, warm, caring, loving things to yourself. All of a sudden, you find it's less important what other people think of you. What a terrific discovery. It's not that it doesn't feel good, it does. It's just not as important as it once was. It's like, once you've had a good meal, you're not as hungry as you were before. Big surprise, huh? Build those building blocks. Number two, of course, is competence. If you do not have the ability right now to say to yourself, I can cope with life. I can handle the basic necessities of life. I know how to do the check thing. I can handle the insurance thing. I can do the tax thing. I can fix the car thing. All those little things that we run across in life, just the basic, this is life sort of stuff. If you can't do that, make it your project to learn how. Don't say, well, he handles the checkbook. Don't you do that. You become a victim to the relationship. It's fine for somebody to handle the checkbook for you, just providing you can do it yourself. That's a choice. That's a preference. Not a necessity. Do that. As you're doing that, do the second thing. Find one thing, and the best way to look for it is, what do you enjoy doing? Is there something that nobody has to pay you to do? You just enjoy it. It's fun. As a matter of fact, you might even pay to do it. Find one thing that you enjoy doing, and then become better at it than the average person. Now, you're not doing this because once you do, you'll be worthy. You're doing this because you're worthy, and you deserve that kind of ability. Increase your competence. Thirdly, get it out of your head that it's the star you were born under, the luck that you didn't get, the people that you never met, the schools you didn't get to go to, the parents you wished you'd had, that determines your success in life. And put this thought there instead. What happens to me is not what makes the difference. Yes, it would be great if I knew the right people. Yes, it would be great if my timing was better on that business deal. Yes, it would be terrific if my supervisor was a human being. What happens to me, however, is not what makes the difference. Okay? Here's the rest of it. What I do about what happens to me is what makes the difference. Sometimes you succeed because of life, and sometimes you have to succeed in spite of it. But the common denominator is it's you doing it. Get it out of your head, you don't have power. You got muscles you don't know you have. Try using them and you'll feel them, just like exercise. Finally, virtue. The old aphorism says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. You need to have something to believe in, my friends. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I could, because I think I know, but I won't do that to you. I'll just make sure that Jerry Murray knows what he believes and does his best to live up to that. And if somebody thinks I'm not doing it, my dad gave me some advice years ago. He says, son, when people tell lies about you, and they've done that about me, when people tell lies about you, live your life so that your life calls them a liar. Find something to believe in, and then do your dead level best to be that person you believe you should be. You deserve that kind of life. You're worth it. Work on those 4 building blocks of self-esteem. Number 4, well, this is a good one. This is big time. Learn to reframe your experience. Reframe your experience. Now, what does that mean? You know what framing is. You have a picture. Have you ever noticed that you've had a picture that it looked okay, it was nice, but it didn't have a good frame? And you took it out, you spent a little money, and you got this gorgeous, beautiful frame, perfectly matched to the picture, color coordinated, all that, you know. And now you look at that picture, and son of a gun, if that isn't gorgeous. It's much better looking than it was, and all you did was reframe it. Let me give you an example. I'm going to say something, and sir, I'm going to say it to you, just because you made the mistake of sitting down front. And all the rest are going to listen, okay? This isn't true. I don't know any of this. I'm just using you as a guinea pig, okay? You have a weakness. You have a weakness, okay? That's the picture. How does that feel? Does that feel good? You got a big nose. Now I'm going to put it in a new frame. Taking it down to the shop, paying a little money, new frame. Here's the new frame. It's the same picture, though. Pay attention, because it's the same picture, just a different frame. Sir, you have an area of undeveloped strength. See, to the first one, you got a weakness. It's, oh, yeah? To the second one, you have undeveloped strength. Oh, yeah? Just a different frame. Just a different way of looking at it. I'm going to give you what I believe to be the most powerful word in the English language. I'm sincere about this. The most powerful word in the English language has the ability to transform a defeating experience, a destructive experience, and turn it completely around into a successful experience. One word. Whew. What a word. Yet. That's the word. You know, when you say things like, I can't do that. Yet. Totally transforms it. I'm not good in relationships. Yet. I'm not successful. Yet. You see, one way puts a period on it and the door is closed, and there you are. That's you. That's your identity. You don't like it, but you're a classic. And the other way opens the door and says, hey, there's a light at the end of that tunnel. There's hope there. There's transformation there. There's change there. There's possibility there. There's potential there. Yet, I don't like myself very much. Yet. Powerful. Reframe that experience. Reframe your social experiences. One of the biggest problems you have socially, if you have self-esteem problems, you overestimate others and underestimate yourself. Evidence in little things like, you ever go hear a pop star or a country star or somebody you admired, you saw them on television, you listen to their recordings, boy, they're great, now you go see them in person, and what do you say? Gee, they're a lot shorter than I thought they were. Why? Because they were 16 feet tall when you were listening to them, but now you see them as a human being, and by God, hey, there he is. My son went down to Las Vegas. My son is 6'4". And he went into the men's room, and he was standing there at the prayer stall. And he had gone to hear an entertainer that he greatly admired. And he turned and looked, and lo and behold. I mean, that's a very awkward time to discover you're standing next to Randy Travis. And I thought I knew what he was going to say, but he didn't. What he said was, he said, "Dad, you know something? He's short." One of the biggest problems you have socially is you overestimate others and underestimate yourself. You know something? You're not so bad, and they're not so good. Reframe that, and here's one of the ways you can do it. When you have problems with people, you can do two things. You can call them nasty names, or you can call yourself nasty names. I just can't get along. How do I handle people? Or you can have problems with people and leave your worth out of it by saying this: this is a problem for them. It's not a threat to me. You're working on the job, and you're doing fine. You haven't done a darn thing wrong, but your boss got up on the wrong side of the bed, and they come in, and there you are. And you've always been a target before, and once a target is established, they tend to go back and shoot at the same one. You notice that? There you are. You're vulnerable. You don't complain. You're easy. And they start laying it on you and find fault with something you did 3 weeks ago, and it wasn't even you anyway. And they're picking you apart. And you're sitting there saying, woe is me. How do I ever get into these situations? Nobody likes me, doesn't respect me, doesn't appreciate my work, etc., etc. And what you ought to be saying is, I'm going to put a new frame on this whole thing. I don't like this picture. I want to make it pretty. Gee, my boss must be having a bad day because I'm terrific. This is a problem for them. This is a statement about where they are, not about where I am. This is a statement about who they are, not about who I am. And I realize you can carry that to extreme because sometimes you do goof up, but still it's not an issue of worth. Let it be a problem for them. Yes, I made a mistake, but it didn't call for that reaction. This is a statement about them. I'll correct my mistake, but they have a problem. Too bad. Reframe that experience. Number 5, use visualization. You've heard of that one before. I'm going to tell you how really to do it. Don't paint little pictures in your mind sitting on a bag of money. Don't paint little pictures driving a Ferrari. There's a much better way for you to use the incredible powers of visualization, and we could take an hour to explain why they're so powerful, but they are. Let's just give it that. Here's how you use them. You go into this creative, fertile ground of your imagination, and I challenge you to do it with me right now. Don't even have to close your eyes. Just go where I'm going to describe for you. I want you to go back. I want you to go back to a time when you were young and you were hurting. You felt afraid. You felt alone. You felt uncared about. You felt unloved. You felt rejected. You might even be crying. I want you to go to that time. And what actually happened probably left you right there in your pain. But now, in your imagination, I want you to see that little girl, that little boy, that child inside you who was hurt and scared and didn't understand. Maybe mommy and daddy were fighting and you heard a word divorce. You didn't really understand it, but it scared the heck out of you. I want you to go now as the adult that you are and see that adult walk into the room and go up to that little girl. And I ask you, if a loving, caring, deeply devoted, loyal person to that little child could have walked in that day, at that time, what did that little guy, that little gal need? What do they need? I want you to give it to them. Did they need to be held? Do they need someone to say, I know it's scary, but it's going to be okay. I'll be there with you. I won't leave you. I had an experience with abandonment. Some of you who heard me speak here before on relationships heard me talk about that experience. And how I had to cure that was to go to that little 6-year-old Jerry who was so terrified that he had been abandoned and say, hey, guy, I'm here. I know they left, but I'm staying, and I'll never leave. You want to cry? Go ahead, but let me hold you while you cry. It's going to be okay. Use your visualization to go to those hurting places inside of you and be the loving, caring adult that you know that little person needed, and give it to them. If you find the tears coming, all the better. It just means it's working. If you find the feelings enveloping you, all the better. It's just having an effect on you. And do it until you don't need to do it anymore. I did it 2 or 3 times a day for months, and then once a week for several more months. Now I do it every 3 or 4 months. Just go and see the guy, little 6-year-old Jerry. He's not nearly so frightened any longer because he knows I'm going to come back whenever I leave. And I do. Use that visualization to produce that. Now use it in another way too. Use it to see yourself being successful, but once again, don't see the bag of money you're sitting on or the Ferrari. Use it to see yourself acting in ways that will create success. See yourself smiling at people. See yourself confidently extending your hand and shaking theirs as you look them right in the eye. See yourself succeeding at a task. See yourself having difficulty and then buckling down and trying harder and overcoming the obstacle. And see it over and over and over. I've done research with sports people, professionals, and I found that invariably, for instance with basketball players, that when a basketball player is shooting like a free throw, the ones that they miss are the ones that for a split second as the ball is going up, they see themselves missing. And the ones that they make are the ones that they see. Swish. See yourself being successful, but not the rewards of the success, the behavior of the success. Now that may mean for some of you, you're going to have to find out what those behaviors are. Okay, then do it. And then see yourself doing it. On a date, in a relationship, on a job. Use your visualization to create the world in your mind so that your body, the willing servant of the mind, then can carry out your wishes. Number 6, act as if. Somebody put it this way, fake it till you make it. Act as if. Here's what I mean by that. William James, the first American psychologist and my particular patron saint. Freud is a Model T for me. William James is Cadillac. Said back in 1910, do I run because I'm afraid? Or am I afraid because I run? You ever notice that when you had a fear, that you acted on that fear and it got worse? Chicken or the egg? Well, the answer to the question is not either or, but both and. Do you act unsuccessfully because you have low self-esteem? Or do you have low self-esteem because you have acted unsuccessfully? The answer is both and. You expect little of yourself, believe the worst about yourself, see yourself missing the shot, and by golly you do, and you knew it. Why did you bother to try? You knew how it was going to turn out. Start acting as if. Don't wait until you feel the worth in yourself rising to meet your potential. Start acting as if it was already there. It's going to be there. if you believe what I said to you earlier, you will never have more worth than you have right now. If you believe that, then start acting as if you are chock full of worth and value. Here's what you do. In every situation, say to yourself, if I had high self-esteem, what would I say to them? If I had high self-esteem, what would my decision be? If I thought I was terrific, what would I do? And then, do it. Say it. Act as if. And you'll find that as you begin to embrace the behaviors of high self-esteem, you will begin to find your emotions lining up with your behavior. Just as surely as an actor knows if they want to create the emotion of fear, they must act afraid. And they will find themselves having the emotion of fear, so it's real. And if you want to create the feeling of high self-esteem, you must act as if you already had it, and you'll find it coming to support the behavior. It's a powerful force. All those decisions and situations you find yourself in, what would I do if I had high self-esteem? And then do it. Finally, number 7. Number 7, change your expectations. Quit expecting that you should be like someone else. Don't compare yourself to others. Why not? I'm going to tell you why not. Because life is a ladder. Life is a ladder. Every rung of the ladder is an achievement that we create in our life. The achievements take me up the ladder. The myth is that the ladder has a top. And if I keep achieving, getting better and better and better and better and better, one day I'll be as good as it gets, and I'll be sitting on the top of the world looking around at everybody below me. I have arrived. That's the myth. It drives perfectionists crazy. Because the reality is the ladder is a circle. There ain't a top to it. And that every rung that you climb just reveals another rung. Because the secret of life is growth, not achievement. And the rungs are there only to spur you to grow. The achievements meant nothing. It was the growth they created by acquiring them. That was what you were after. Why? Because when you get an achievement, what do? You set another goal, don't you? Make $1 million bucks? Guess what you're going to do? Okay, I'm going to make $2 million now. Get $2 million, guess what you're going to do? A lot of guys do that with marriages, as a matter of fact. Whoops. I don't think I can get her. Oh, I got her. Now who else could I get? Got an 8, let me go for a 9. Hey, they're all 10s, guys. That's the secret. The ladder is a circle. Now, the problem is that you're on your rung of the ladder, and you look over and you see George. George is the same age as you, about the same intelligence, about the same bill, lives in the same city, and George is 4 rungs higher than you are. And you say, woe is me, I'm not so good. Look at George, bigger house, bigger car, bigger salary, same age. I'm a loser. The joke's on you, my friend. George doesn't have the same ladder. He's got a different ladder. Everybody has their own ladder. You don't know where George started. He may have started on one rung below where you now see him, and you think he's climbed past you, when in fact he's only gone 1 rung and you've climbed 46. Don't judge your life by how many rungs yet are above you. Judge it. Get your respect for yourself from the rungs that you have climbed. I sat in the University of Santa Clara, a 26-year-old freshman, high school dropout. Remember that guy? Remember the drunkard in the Navy, the fighter, the loser? 26 years old. It was a trip getting there, but there I am. I'm a freshman sitting in University of Santa Clara, and I'm sitting in a class. Let me see if I can remember it. Some of you math guys here will correct me later. Differential calculus and analytical geometry? Or is it analytical calculus and differential geometry? You see my problem? I'm sitting in this class. Santa Clara is a Jesuit school. I've got a Jesuit priest up there. Happens to be German. He is terrific at math. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak English. I mean, what passes for English doesn't sound like English to me. He's got this thick German accent. I mean, I'm having trouble reading the book, let alone understanding this guy. I'm sitting in a classroom of 18-year-old freshmen, all of them from Bellarmine Prep, the Catholic prep school with all the sharp kids. And they're asking this guy questions. I don't understand what he said. What's the question for? I don't know what page we're on. This is God's truth. This happened to me. And I sat in that class saying, oh boy. And I started saying to myself, listen to your internal dialogue and ask yourself, does it help you or hurt you? I started saying to myself, God, you're stupid. You think you're such hot stuff because you got into the university. I mean, you've got to do something once you're there, idiot, and you're not going to be able to cut it. Look at these guys. They're younger than you, and they are rungs ahead of you on the ladder. Whatever made you think you could go back to school? And I walked out of that classroom defeated, determined to drop out of the University of Santa Clara. Fortunately, where it came from, I do not know. I began to think to myself, yeah, but for a high school dropout who flunked every class in his junior and senior year, because you got to go to the class to get grades, I understood that later. I was shooting pool. Nobody told me you had to show up. It wasn't my fault. It was a sharp group. I started saying to myself, for a high school dropout, for a loser whose biggest accomplishment so far was to drink everybody under the table, even though you're 26, and even though you don't have a clue what they're talking about, you ain't doing bad to be here. Probably all things being considered, you're on about the same rung they are. Now, can you correct the fact that you started much further down the ladder than they did? I got me a tutor. She turned out to be pretty. That was a plus. And I went through that class, and I ended up graduating valedictorian of my doctoral class. That's not to brag. That's to tell you, you're terrific. You've got to get those blocks out of the way so you can see it and then live it. Change your expectations. One more expectation. Don't be like other people. Be like you. You get that one? You got your own ladder. Don't compare yourself to anybody else. You can only compare yourself to you. Are you growing? Are you moving ahead? That's all that counts. That's all that counts. Not whether you're in front of somebody else, because they're on a different racetrack. So it's academic. The other expectation, I discovered this one accidentally. My doctoral dissertation was on the development of self-esteem. The development of self-esteem and internal control as a function of perceived competence in interpersonal relationships. They said if you make the title sound real important, people will think you had something to say. What I wanted to do was to examine what would happen to people if they had an experience that elevated their self-esteem. What changes could I expect to see take place? And one of the things that I did is I gave them a little questionnaire that examined a thing that we call a frame of reference. It examines how they rated themselves on a scale of strong, intelligent, all these nice things you can say about yourself, as they really were. Answer this question as you really are on a scale of 0 to 10. Strong, 0 to 10. Answer, as you really are. And then, now answer it as you believe you should be. I'm a 6, I should be a 9. Okay? Real self-perceptions, ideal self-perceptions. Self-esteem was measured by the discrepancy between the real self and the ideal self. Those individuals whose perceptions of who they really were so